So, hello everyone. My name is Paul Stevens, and welcome to this short-term rentals webinar on squeezing the pips, maximising peak period business, sponsored by Key Data and Logify. I'm the editor of Short-Term Rentals here at International Hospitality, and I'm your host for today's session. And before we begin, let's first introduce our first webinar sponsor for today and for our series. Delighted to welcome Key Data, as they say here on screen, the most trusted source for short-term rental data. We'll hear from Sally very shortly about Key Data, but first we've got a sponsored video quickly to show.
It's actually helped us increase our revenue, because what it allowed us to do was look at, for example, as an example, a two-bedroom property in a specific area and look at what the benchmarked ADR is for that and what the occupancy is. And we found that in some areas our ADR was actually less than the market average.
So a big thank you to Key Data for sponsoring today's session and our latest series. We've now got our second webinar sponsor. We'll just bring that up on the next slide. So Logify is the all-in-one vacation rental platform that empowers independent hosts and property managers with tools to start and grow their businesses. Again, we're going to hear from James from their team very shortly. Both Sally and James are speaking on the session today. But first, we've got a quick video to show from Logify.
Try Logify and increase the revenue of your vacation rental business. Create your bookable vacation rental website. Select a template. Upload your rental information and share it with the world in minutes. With Logify, you can connect to booking portals, manage all your reservations, stay in touch with your guests, and automate time-consuming tasks. Go to logify.com and grow your bookings today.
Big thank you and welcome to Logify as well. You did see on the video there that Logify is also announcing a very generous offer of 10% off yearly and bi-yearly professional and ultimate plans until December 2024 using code STR10. So you can find more details on screen now and in the chat. So please do get in touch with the Logify team after today. So let's go ahead and introduce our speaker lineup for today. And why don't we start with Sally, please? You're first on my screen, so please introduce yourself with Key Data.
Hi everyone, my name's Sally Henry. I'm Vice President of Business Development for Key Data in EMEA. Great to be here.
Thank you very much, Sally. Next up, I'll introduce James, please. Go ahead and introduce yourself and Logify.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. I'm James. I'm the VP of Global Sales at Logify. And as you just saw, we're an all-in-one platform for vacation rental hosts and property managers. So yeah, with over 200,000 users on our platform, we support everyone from, single owners or hosts to property managers that have hundreds of listings, and we help them get direct bookings and connect to all the major OTAs. So that's a little bit about Logify. And then prior to Logify, I was at SiteMinder for around 5.5 years. So I've got a pretty good understanding of some of the challenges that come with revenue management. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to talk more about your dynamic pricing tool later, James. So we'll get onto that very shortly. Next up, we have Martina from a company you may have heard of called Booking.com. So Martina, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Martina. I work at Booking.com for about 6 years now. At the moment, I'm spending a lot of my time in our vacation rental business unit, and I'm working passionately on both the traveler and the partner side. So I'm working with our product teams to develop products and make vacation rentals discoverable on our platform and actually drive demand for our supply. And at the same time, I'm working on our product proposition for hosts on our platform to make sure that they can grow their business and satisfy their needs through our collaboration. Very much looking forward to chatting with the rest of you all.
Excellent. Thank you, Martina. Delighted to have you on board. And last but my name is Lisa. We've got Katie from Amadeus.
I was muted.
There we
and I noticed it myself. I'm Katie Morrow. I work on the BI product team at Amadeus. Via acquisitions, I've been with Amadeus over 15 years, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about more on the hotel and airline side and give some insights into what we're seeing in that part of the industry as well.
Of course. Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you very much to all of our panel. I'm really looking forward to talking with you over the next 50 minutes to an hour. So in terms, we've got a few webinar guidelines for today as well. All of the details are going to be posted in the chat, so please do go there to ask any of our panelists a question. We'll have a panel discussion lasting around 45 to 50 minutes, leading into some audience questions, and then a recording will be sent around to everyone who registered within the next 48 hours. Before we begin, a bit of context ahead of today's discussion as well. So one of our sponsors, Key Data, has been securing partnerships with industry advocacy organisations, including the STAA in England, the ASSC in Scotland, and Astra in Australia. So again, creating a huge data set of information. It's also partnered with Amadeus, who are represented today by Katie, as we spoke to. And even over the last couple of days, we've seen Key Data sponsor partner with the likes of eVivo and Hospitable as well, and of course Breezeway on our screen there. Our other series sponsor, Lodgify, announced its own integration with Google Vacation Rentals, and we'll also be checking in, as mentioned, with James to learn more about Lodgify's dynamic pricing tool and how it is informing pricing and revenue management strategies. And finally, I'm really looking forward to hearing the thoughts of the panel about maximising peak period business around major events, or disruptions as they're going to be called today, notably, of course, the Paris Olympics and Paralympics, the Olympics starting only next month, the Football European Championship starting in Germany this Friday, and of course, what webinar would be complete without mentioning Taylor Swift's Eras concert tour. So on your screen, a couple of relevant stories about the Olympics and the rates in Paris. So there'll be plenty of time to discuss those over the next, over the course of this webinar. So let's start, and again, a little bit of context, and really start to learn about what the data is showing us, what we can do about it, and overall learning a little bit more, delving into the current booking behaviour and how it's pacing for the summer. So Sally, I tried to give you the best introduction I could, and of course you've created this huge data set with the sort of partnerships that you've been forging at Key Data. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you're seeing the data showing us at the moment in terms of an overview?
Yeah, of course. Look, I'm not going to do a full data presentation. This is about giving you some key facts that I'd like you to, we'll set the scene, because actually today what we want to talk about is what we can do about what we're seeing. But I will throw a load of data figures out. If anyone wants specifics, please contact me directly after the webinar, and I'll help out anyone that I can. So they're going to be quite broad. As I share some, I'd like you to think about how you have a handle on these KPIs and figures for your own business, for your own geographies, for your own portfolio. So these are going to give you a temperature gauge of what we're seeing as global trends, but the importance is to be able to dive into them and take action against what we see. So looking broadly, the remit is the world, so it's quite a large data overview to give. But really what we've taken a look at how Europe is faring, and again also how the US is shaping up. So if we take a look, this is all data from our directly integrated clients as of last week. So going into June, so almost halfway through the year. So in data speak, we often use H1 as terminology, which is effectively the first half of the year, which was almost at the end. So Europe, if we look at RevPAR, now RevPAR is the metric which is balancing both ADR and occupancy. So it's really what is the revenue taken at the end after you've set your prices and you've got your occupancy. So probably the most important metric to use as a measure of have you got your strategy right. So Europe H1 RevPAR was up 11%, whereas we saw in the US it was down 5%. So we're seeing this continuing trend that we also saw in 2023 as we traded post-COVID. So we're seeing a stronger European performance, but a pressured US performance that has seen both occupancy and rates come down. So it all stems really through, so Europe, we're still seeing stronger occupancy. In H1 across the board, we saw supply grow at 13%, but we saw demand grow, that's guest nights, by 20%. So that's contributing to that stronger occupancy growth that we're seeing. H1 in the US, by counterpart, we saw a more moderate supply growth, around 5%, but flat demand. So that's been putting pressure. So occupancy has been softer, and prices have come down. We take a look now, really, looking at the summer and looking at Europe as a whole. You know, what's it looking like? We have a couple of areas that is showing positive RevPAR at the moment for summer, namely Greece and the UK. Greece is stronger than the UK. Building in a little bit of context, summer UK last year ended up slightly down on RevPAR. It was -3 if we're just looking at the pure summer months. So, you know, but we're looking ahead to this summer. We've got higher prices, but flat demand for summer as it currently stands. My question to you, and I know James will cover this more with revenue management strategies, is how long can those prices hold higher before we need to see them come down to get the occupancy? Greece, on the other hand, you know, that's been enjoying both higher prices and higher occupancy, so they're in a stronger position for summer. But we've also seen a much earlier booking window, so we need to take in, you know, has some of the bookings come forward. But equally, they're the one contradiction across the world that are also seeing longer lengths of stay. The rest of the world is contending with these contractions of length of stay as well, which is putting pressure on this end revenue. But let's take a quick look very specifically at summer, and let's look at some of the key markets. We've taken a look at France, Italy, Spain and Portugal, and they've all had this slightly different journey, and this is why it's so important to keep a track on your pacing. So if we look at Europe as a whole, in Q1, we looked at guest paid occupancy. This is when we know a guest has made a booking, and they were at 14% in Q1, so nice and strong. That fell to +1% in Q2 arrivals, so that's arrivals April, May, June, almost done. Looking ahead to Q3 arrivals, that July, August, September, including that peak summer, we're pacing at -2% for occupancy. So we're starting to see this softening of occupancy in Europe as a whole. Looking at the rates, looking across the same, it's +5, +4 and +10. So +10% occupancy, but +10% ADRs for Q3, but negative occupancy means we'll probably need to look at pricing. But just to dive in very quickly, and just to throw some data out, we're seeing quite a different story for the different countries. In particular, if we take a look at France, Q1 was strong, +15% paid occupancy. Q2 is trading at -10. Q3 is currently pacing at -36%. We're seeing this huge difference in the quarter arrivals that we really need to take note. If you look at the ADRs for France, it was +2 in Q1, it was +1 in Q2, but it's +29 in Q3. So we've got a -36% occupancy and a +29% ADR. So again, some price adjustments needed. Looking at some other countries, to give you an idea, a similar idea, Portugal, a similar story, but not as extreme. We were seeing +9% occupancy in Q1, that's fallen to +2% in Q2, and it's pacing at -5% in Q3. So we've got this similar story going through. Same for Italy, +9 in Q1. It's +6 in Q2, but it's -25% pacing for occupancy in Q3. And lastly, if we look at Spain, it's kind of a much more of a tempered view, +15% occupancy in Q1. And then it fell to -3 in Q2, but it's -1 in Q3 at the moment. So, you know, they're all very different, which is why you need to understand how these figures work for you and your portfolio. But we are definitely seeing a market soften as we look ahead to that peak summer. And we still have a long way to go. If we look now, we've probably got about 30 percentage points to pick up between now and the end of August, so that we really do have time to influence this strategy over the next few, well, 2.5 months are critical. If we couple that with shorter length of stay for summer that we're seeing everywhere but Greece, on average for Q3 arrivals across Europe, we're seeing a 10% reduction in length of stay, which is significant. You've got to sell effectively 10% more nights just to stand still. So we have a number of factors that property managers are navigating at the moment. If we take just a real quick look at the US, we're seeing really that price adjustment. We had a huge boom in the US post-COVID, and then we've seen this adjustment start last year and it's continued into this year. So we've got very low single-digit negativity in Q1, Q2 and Q3 and for occupancy. And we've got flat ADRs at the moment for each. So we've kind of got a -3%, -4% RevPAR, which is, it's almost the ship has steadied a little, hopefully what we're seeing. But the one thing we did say, and I'll just call this out quickly, is some US markets like Southwest, Southeast, Rockies, the Midwest, they've all had this softer summer occupancy and higher ADRs. And they did bring prices down in Q1, but not quick enough to make up for that bump. So it's all about being super price sensitive and super responsive to the markets that are coming down. I think that probably gives you enough of a flavour to say we are seeing a softer market, so we need to navigate it really carefully. And I guess now it's what do we do about that is probably the key to why we're sat here today.
Thank you for that very detailed overview, Sally. And for the benefit of our audience, we weren't planning to have slides in this part of the webinar, but is there, Sally, is there a place that we can go to access this data? Perhaps
I could do a summary of that if people are interested.
We may be able to get that into the post webinar.
I'm really sad. There's a lot of data, but whenever I don't put any detail in, people go, "Well, Europe's too broad." Like, so it's just to try and show that different regions are operating very differently, but there's a similar trend that we're pulling out, which was
exactly that was meant as an overview. So we'll try and get that into the post webinar follow-up content. So thank you for that, Sally. We'll come back to you very shortly. But Katie, I know you've got some information for us about the sort of trends that you're seeing in hotels and accommodation. Let's start perhaps with the North America trends and what you're seeing.
And contrary to Sally, I am kind of going very high level, but I am also happy as a follow-up to provide individual country or market level information, especially within Europe. So if that's of interest, I'm happy to do that. But let's talk about North America first. So listen, when we started off the year, we saw pretty much flat to 2023, and you saw some peaks, especially in April, mostly coming from the Easter holiday shift from April to March, but group was really strong in April, so that was good to see. And even group as we go into the summer looks pretty good. So if I look at group specifically, June is at a high of 19.7% group on the books. August looks pretty good to last year, but as we go into the fall, kind of that group base starts to drop off. And in hotel speak, right, the group is really the driving force behind compression. When you have the group business on the books, there's less availability, and so that changes the strategy of all of the hotels. So seeing that group strength in the summer is really good because, like Sally mentioned, we are definitely seeing a softening in leisure demand. So overall, in the summer months in the United States, we are behind last year. So this is where we kind of call it the end of revenge travel. Is this the end of really that leisure drive? And, you know, there's a lot of talk about that when you're talking to hotels. And really the focus now is how do we continue to drive more group business and try to build the occupancies in that way, but also around corporate travel. So as I think about, does this trend continue into short-term rentals, how do you then start to capitalize on corporate travel? So I know that hotel companies right now are laser focused on RFP season. So this is the time of year where they start to figure out what companies do they want to work with from a corporate travel perspective into 2025. And they kind of start those negotiations now. And since COVID, it really just hasn't been much of a focus because corporate travel didn't bounce back quickly, right? But now everyone is, like I said, laser focused on it. And so if you think that that trend's going to continue into short-term rentals where you start to see that decrease in leisure demand, is there an opportunity to capitalize on some corporate travel? Are there opportunities in short-term rentals to bring corporate travelers to your destination? So that's something I think that's very interesting and that you should be paying attention to. And the last point on North America is the lead time. So during COVID, everything happened in the week for the week, right? People were nervous about making a future reservation, not knowing are things going to be shut down, etc. We have seen that trend really continue. So yes, you still have people that are making further out reservations. That's come back somewhat. But in North America, still 52% of all transient bookings are made in the week for the week. So if you're thinking about from a short-term rental perspective, competing with hotels, most of those bookings are being made very close to arrival. So I think you should always be considering, what is my cancellation policy when I'm competing with a segment that has in the week for the week arrivals and they're trying to drive the business at that point. So you might want to think about that because, again, hotels are still driving that business in North America very close to arrival date.
And are the sort of trends that you're seeing in North America, is that tallying with what you're seeing in the EU, or are there perhaps some important distinctions there?
So I think you have a little bit of a distinction. So when I talked about the hotel occupancies in the summer months, the EU is seeing an uptick in July and August compared to last year, although May and June were a little bit behind. So I do think that summer travel in EU looks pretty strong, which is good. I feel like post-COVID, the EU's kind of been about a year behind the US as far as what we see from a trends perspective. So I think it's just something to always keep in mind. But the one thing to note in EU from a lead time perspective is that only about 30% of transient bookings are coming in the week for the week. So there's definitely a lot more planning in Europe around summer vacations or just future travel. So again, when you're thinking about that cancellation policy and how you're competing from a lead time and how your pacing is, compared to the market, that's something to think about is not as many bookings are coming in that arrival week as is in North America. So that's just something to think about. And corporate travel, again, it's going to look so different than it did pre-COVID. The distribution of it is very different, but I think it's something that you should be kind of thinking about in your mind. Is there an opportunity for me to find a way to get corporate travel into my unit?
Excellent. Thank you for that overview,
Absolutely.
Katie. We'll come back to the airline market because I know you've got some interesting insights into that particular vertical, but I'll turn back to Sally there. And Sally, you've heard Katie speaking there. I wonder what you're perhaps seeing in terms of the data with feeder markets, and I know you've got more of an EU focus on this at the moment.
Yeah, so feeder market, we took a look because what part of that recovery that, and I think Katie touched on it as well, that revenge travel, everyone started traveling post-COVID, but then I think it fell in with when the dollar was strong and the euro was weak and certainly sterling was weak. So we saw a lot of US traveling over to Europe. We didn't see the same sort of European travel back to the US, which is something that was quite marked. But yeah, we took a quick look at top feeder markets for locations, if you like, for this summer. So UK is still the top feeder market for the UK. Second at the moment is US, right? So that's really come in for the first time really in quite some time. And then Germany is the third feeder market this summer for the UK. So if you're sat there with a UK portfolio thinking about, are you managing to appeal to these feeder markets, or are you managing to attract others? If you look at Greece, it's Germany, UK and the Netherlands are the top feeder markets for those markets. France, the top feeder market this summer is US, then France, and then the UK. There'll be something around the Olympics, no doubt. Spain, it's domestic, so Spain, followed by UK, followed by US. Portugal, it's the UK, Germany and Portugal. Something our data team pulled out is that the average booking window for the Portuguese booking to stay in Portugal is 10 days. So that moved from 27 days last year to 10 days. So, you know, thinking of your domestic strategy versus your inbound is really important depending on your segmentation. And for Italy, it's Italy, US and Germany. So it's a real mixed, diverse bag. And looking at the US, the top travelers are based in California, Texas, Florida, Georgia and New York. And New Yorkers book 111 days out compared to everyone else booking shorter. So I think it's really important to understand what your portfolio tracks and what feeder markets you are active in, whether that's via, you know, direct distribution or via the channels to get to some of those markets. They all perform differently.
That's fascinating, Sally. And a lot of those markets we're going to be touching on very shortly when we talk about these sort of events and disruptions, as well as we call them, that are going to be taking place later this year. Thank you for that, Sally. And it's a good segue, I think, into back to Katie as well, about your the airline data you've got at Amadeus. So again, what are sort of the key data points that you're seeing at Amadeus?
So I think it's important to note, and I should have said this before, but the hotel data that I talk about is from our Demand 360 product, which is on the books data that we get from about 45,000 hotels globally. So that covers all the channels, et cetera, directly from the hotels. So I think I should say that. And then from the airline perspective, we really have 4 data sets, but today I'll just kind of touch on briefly searches. So obviously intent to travel, and then what actually gets booked. So London is the hot place, I guess still, right? Even last year, I felt like it was crazy busy and it still seems to be. So from a global perspective, the most searched city from a flight perspective is London. However, the most booked is Bangkok. So it's interesting when you see what's searched and what's booked. So that's from a global perspective. I'm not going to list all of these cities out again. I can share this information after. The U.S. is very strong from a domestic perspective, as Sally kind of mentioned. I don't know if we're seeing as much back and forth between Europe and the US, but so it's very domestic. However, I will say that the top international source market traveling into Europe, at least for this summer, is coming from the US. So I still think the travel's there, but if you take obviously all the people in the United States, it's mostly domestic where you see people searching and booking. Of course, New York City is very high up on the list, as one would expect, as a very strong city within the US. And then for Europe specifically, the most searched and booked is London, followed by Paris, and then Rome and Madrid kind of fight for that 3 and 4 spot, respectively, for searched and booked. So that's kind of the high level numbers. And again, I'm happy to share this as it becomes kind of boring if I just read all these cities out to you. So happy to share that.
In a similar vein to Sally, again, this is sort of meant as an overview, but I know that you have got a report coming out later. So hopefully when that is, then we can start sharing more of that information with our audience too. But of course, hopefully in the post webinar follow-up, we will be able to include some of that data and information.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk more specifically about the Olympics, et cetera, with Martina in just a minute, but our report will come out the last week of June. So you can be looking forward to that if you want to understand the events in Europe and how things are faring.
Perfect. So I would advise everyone to keep their eye on that, and hopefully we'll be able to share ourselves. I was going to say, actually, Katie, does the London aspect of being ahead of Paris, for example, right now, does anything like with that surprise you, or is that in line with what you'd expect?
So from what I've been seeing just on a personal level, I think Paris obviously is very strong in that Olympic timeframe, but I think maybe struggling a little bit in the month of June from an occupancy perspective. I've seen a lot of sales and deals going on, so I'm guessing I don't have data to support that, but that's just my intuition. So I guess when you balance it all out, I guess that's why London still leads right now against Paris. So.
Hey, very, very interesting. Thank you, Katie. I'm going to move over to James quickly, shortly, just to we're going to be talking about the dynamic pricing tool that Logify have launched and revenue management strategies. But of course, it was only a week ago actually that I was myself at a Skift Data and AI Summit last week in New York, and just wanted to run a couple of pieces past everyone. But they were talking, of course, that the key uses for data right now, they broke it into 6 key factors and how data is being used to improve experiences, to prioritize markets, track path-to-path purchases, streamline operations and costs, forecast scenarios, and measure outcomes. And then the next day as well, they had the short-term rental summit. And I remember that pricing inconsistencies was given as the second biggest challenge for the short-term rental sector in a research piece. And pricing was named as the top factor influencing the wow experience. So that gives me a good opportunity to bring in James now as well. And we can talk about some of the revenue management strategies that you're employing, James, at Logify. But could you first, we mentioned the dynamic pricing tool. Could you explain a little bit about how this supports or benefits hosts and PMs exactly in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you've just heard, there's a lot of data out there, and to set an effective pricing strategy, to set, and optimize your rates, you really need to be using a lot of data, and it's extremely time consuming. So quite often setting dynamic rates involves, looking at historical trends, current occupancy rates, competitor prices, local events, your availability, competitors' availability, and all of this just to set one rate. And then once you get a booking, for some people, they then need to do it all again and reset rates. And it's a super time consuming process. So as I mentioned before, we've had around 200,000 users today, ranging from single hosts all the way up to people with hundreds of rentals. And probably the consistency amongst them all is one of their biggest challenges, is really having the time available to, sit down and analyze this vast amount of data that's available to then build an effective pricing strategy, right? It's super time consuming. So for that reason, what we tend to see is many of our customers, they actually just have 2 rates. They have one for the high season, one for the low season, and they might do some tinkering here and there, but it's pretty consistent. It just takes too much time. So for that reason, what we've done is we've actually launched a new tool. It's completely integrated sorry, into the Logify platform. And it's a dynamic pricing tool. So you can just activate it. All of our customers can just switch it on. And what the dynamic pricing tool does is it's actually does all of this analysis for you. So it's got an algorithm that looks at a whole multitude of data points like your location, amenities, guest capacity, the demands in your area, seasonality, events that are going on, pretty much everything that we've discussed. It's constantly tracking all of this, and it sets an optimal rate for you. And then the moment a booking comes in, it resets the rate to maximize, like we talked about, maximize RevPAR, right? Maximize the revenue that you're getting per available room or per available night, RevPAN, if you're within short-term rentals. But ultimately, our dynamic pricing tool, it allows our customers to just activate, and then they can spend their time focusing on, their guests. For our customers that have activated dynamic pricing, they've seen a 20% increase in their revenue. So it's making a real difference for our customers. So, pricing can be extremely complex. There's so many data points that you could look at. And using the dynamic pricing tool or any one of the dynamic pricing tools available, we have partners as well that offer dynamic pricing. It really allows you to ensure that you have the best rate available at the right time to maximize your revenue. So yeah, in essence, dynamic pricing helps businesses save time and increase their revenue. So yes, it's a really great tool. I'd recommend to everyone that's looking to save some time and make more money.
I think you've mentioned there that sort of being reinforced through the thread, the idea of time, the amount of data in these sets and the complexity of data. I know that Lodgify, you're setting out to enable vacation rental owners to independently manage and market their businesses online too. So bearing all of that in mind, why do you think perhaps a dynamic pricing tool is preferable to perhaps a dedicated revenue manager? How would that actually, how does that allow people to, owners and hosts to really maximize that peak period business, would you say?
Yeah, well, previously, businesses would have had, teams of analysts analyzing data in order to get to the point what a dynamic pricing tool can give you in real time. So a dynamic pricing tool is, a really, it's a tool that all revenue managers really use, to be honest with you. So if you don't have a revenue manager and you're dependent on yourself to set your rates and you have limited time, right, just activate the dynamic pricing tool. It will set your rates for you. If you're a revenue manager and you want to, set your own pricing and you want to build out your own pricing strategy, then you can use a dynamic pricing tool like one of our partners, where you'll be able to use that to build your own pricing strategies. So it will give you recommendations and guides, but it allows you to set certain parameters. So dynamic pricing tools should be really used by everyone, including revenue managers, because it just saves them so much time. So it's a tool that everyone would be using, whether you're an owner or a property manager with hundreds of properties. A dynamic pricing tool is going to save you just countless hours, and it's going to help you increase your revenue. There's no doubt about that. I think that's proven at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add in as revenue management becomes more complex in your space. I mean, I'll look at hotels now, right, who have been doing this very long time, and there's so many data sets. And it's even for a revenue manager, that's their whole job. It's almost impossible to sift through all of the data, analyze it, and then make a better decision, right? So it's how do you bring that data together, have a tool that can support that. And it's not really to replace a revenue manager necessarily. It's actually just to guide them and assist them in their jobs to make sure that they're making the right decisions. So
interesting. Thank you, James, and also a very valid point there added by Kate too. Something that we've probably all discussed a little bit so far in the discussion is we're talking about events, and there's some particularly starting even this week, or of course the Olympics coming up as well. But it's not just sporting events. We've got all sorts of events, elections on the horizon as well, and all sorts of things. So Sally, I'm going to give you this little moment as well, just to help shape the narrative around what we're seeing about the impact of events, and really then taking away how we can be prepared for these events.
Yeah, I think events can be an opportunity. They can also be a distraction. I think it's important that everyone looks at data, and it doesn't need to be data from any company. Just listen to the news and see what events are coming up. There's a lot of events we cannot stop. General elections are there, the big sporting events. But I think your narrative about how you're going to deal with them is what's most important. So I know from past experience that when there's a big sporting event, whether it's the Euros or the World Cup, the nation kind of holds its breath. So if you're selling to a source nation that is in the Euros or in a World Cup, then wait until they're out, and then as soon have all your marketing messaging ready to go the second they get knocked out, because suddenly people need something to look forward to. It doesn't happen with any other sport in the same way. It's football which sort of controls the minds of the masses for sure. But then obviously look, and we joke about Taylor Swift. The reason why I've included a tiny bit of Taylor Swift is she's in Edinburgh. I was getting the train up from London on Friday morning, and normally King's Cross, which is a London-based train station, it's really quite, here's your next train and it's going to be delayed and that's it. They had a whole Taylor Swift narrative saying, this is your Taylor Swift train taking you to Edinburgh. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it. Wow. But what we have seen in Edinburgh, where she was this weekend, is once again, ADR and occupancy is off the scale. She is contributing to the economy single-handedly. And the one very, very quick anecdote that I then read was that also the sale of adult nappies has gone up, where she's in concert, where people have decided they don't want to miss a second of her concert. So it's getting quite disturbing. But I think making sure you're priced for an event, and not necessarily Taylor Swift, but any event that is coming to town, whether it's hyperlocal or huge. But then also to have a narrative for some of these disruptions. So we, you know, not 49% of the world's population is going to a general election this year, right? So whether it's UK, France have just called the snap election, we've got the US election, there's distraction in the media again, which means that the pacing is going to come in differently. So you need to decide whether that's speaking to owners to hold your nerve or trying to force, you know, earlier bookings, but have a plan because you know that they're coming. The Olympics, which we'll dive into now, is super interesting because it's this big once every 4 years event, but it's caused it's probably caused a dichotomy of activity in the short-term rental world, which we can look into.
Thank you, Sally. I think that's probably the first time we've mentioned adult nappies on
I'm so sorry. I read it. I had to share my Taylor Swift thing.
But and as English football supporters, we're probably waiting for the jokes about penalties and coming home. So let's hope it's not too early in the tournament. But Martina, I'll hand over to you now as well, because thank you for your patience as well. But we've got a lot to dive into with you both about the event side and also about search trends too. So Martina, you've heard Sally there talk about the various sorts of events. We mentioned sporting events, we mentioned concerts, we mentioned elections. What are the trends that you're currently seeing in Europe and beyond at booking.com?
Well, let me start with the most recent point about sport events. So we did a recent study in Paris, like to Katie's point earlier, like Paris is one of the top destinations historically, but now on top of what we've seen over the years, they also have one of a kind sports event happening, and that creates all sorts of dynamics into the market. So I'm going to start with the demand, and then I'm going to get into supply. So demand wise, the locals, when we look at the locals who are either watchers or people who are crew of the Olympics or volunteers, only 45% of them have booked their accommodation for the duration of their stay. And that's, you know, the games are approaching. You would think that they really want to jump and be the first to book, but they're holding off. Either they're looking to stay with family or friends, or they're just waiting for price changes. That's different from what's happening with those that are inbound from other countries. They are booking at a higher speed. So that creates a different occupancy, I think, than level than I think accommodations have anticipated. And I think at the moment we're seeing about 2/3 saying that they will consider hotels and 1/3 that they will consider vacation rentals. So I think, you know, it's a different setting, I guess, or a different competitive landscape. When it comes to length of stay, 52% are planning to stay for a couple of days only, and another 24% or so for more than 4 days. So I think all these things are going to create gap days, as we call them. And then I think that we're observing already high restrictions. So I think there are different challenges for accommodation owners to face. When we look at supply, though, there's something else interesting happening. So a lot of people are actually planning to leave the broader Paris area that they're actually residing in and rent their place. So that has created a surge into supply. So this is another layer of competition that vacation rental owners have to take into account, because they have other competitors that they didn't have before. So yeah, it's quite interesting to watch. I think they're going to have to balance occupancy challenges with revenue and cost, which is very hard to do. So going back to the points that were mentioned earlier by James, revenue management is hard, but at the moment it's even tougher with these extra disruptions or events happening in the market. One thing I would also like to mention, especially for those who are hosting for the first time, as you get into hosting, just consider your options. Like, for example, I know that a lot want to have control over who stays. At booking.com, we just began on a journey of offering requests to book, which is very different from our only instant book model that we've had historically. So that's something to consider, especially if you want to, you know, expand your channel mix and then try to grow your occupancy through various OTAs. So hope that adds something to the mix.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Martina. I'm actually one of the people who booked through booking.com to go to Paris during the Olympics, and I'm staying out there for 4 days. We're actually flying into Switzerland and then traveling for a couple of days through France.
Nice. So you're the 24%.
I'm one of the 24% and not one of the ones vacating Paris at the time, but we've got plenty more to discuss on that. I know, Katie, I remember we were looking at an Amadeus report as well. I don't know perhaps the latest information you have, but in April, I think it was saying that there are about 50% of hotels already booked in the Paris region for the Olympics. Do you have an update on that at the moment?
I don't. That's the one that's going to come out the last week of the last week of June. So you'll get a final update there. But yeah, over 50% booked for the weeks of July 21st to August 4th. And last year at this time, it was about 20% on the books. So you can see obviously the huge uptick year on year because of the Olympics. So
we do have the link in our the link to your press release in the chat right now, and we will certainly be covering that the latest report and data when that comes out shortly.
I'm sorry, I wanted to give a sneak peek, but I couldn't get it.
No worry at all. Thank you very much, Katie, as well. Martina, back to you as well. But of course, with the events and disruptions that we mentioned there's huge opportunity there as well. I wonder what you see for the hosts and owners tuning in today. What are the opportunities for growth that you see at booking.com, and what should hosts take into account really as that high season approaches?
One other trend that we're seeing, which I think just combines a lot of the talking points that were mentioned earlier. So we may not have revenge travel, but the peak season is such a sacred moment, especially for like families that just need that moment and the year to recharge and reconnect. So there is the appetite to travel, but of course there are economical pressures. So I think what we're observing through a recent travel prediction study that we did for 2024 across the world is that there's a need to balance luxury cravings with just budget, just as simple as that. So I think we're observing actually opportunities. This may sound like let's cut prices down, but that's not the intent. I think that's what we're seeing is that actually people are willing to choose where to upgrade. So we asked, and then we learned that travelers actually are at about 54% rate willing to pay for accommodation upgrades, and at a similar, a bit lower rate for flights and train upgrades. So what we're hearing loud and clear is that they just want to choose where to splurge specifically. So just want to be careful, but actually have the option to choose of where to spend that extra money for their comfort and convenience. We're also hearing that they want to spread their costs through credit cards, for example, which just shows us the appetite that I really don't want to miss that trip. I just want some help of choosing where to splurge at the same time, just like fund my trip. So there are a few opportunities here. I think the convenience seeker should be seen as a revenue opportunity. Like I said, it's not necessarily about price cuts, but about adding value adds that are optional and paid and letting the user choose where they want to spend. And some examples that have been actually used mostly by hotels in the past, like parking, late check-in or check-out, or speedier Wi-Fi, or shuttle services. Those might be opportunities for paid services that also vacation rentals can consider, so you can keep your base price at a certain level and then let the user choose where else to spend. Another idea is to just not forget to join online payments services that OTAs provide, such as booking.com, because then they take care of the installment with the guests, so whether they have a credit card or not. In some markets, actually, credit cards are not vastly used, but they still pay in installments through other services like Klarna, with whom we collaborate. So these are all opportunities for an increased revenue, and making sure that you are still remaining in the eyes of those convenience seekers that are still going to do that trip in the high season. So that's a first takeaway for hosts who are watching us.
And I know obviously you're engaged and specialised in real growth and incremental opportunities at booking.com. So maybe in terms of other demand trends, what else do you think hosts can really leverage in their strategy based on some of the trends that you're seeing at Booking?
Yeah, I think that maybe one important thing to keep in mind is to just really not miss the unmissable demand. Families, groups, and pet owners are growing audiences for vacation rentals. I think that the characteristics that vacation rentals offer, like indoor and outdoor space, privacy, parking facilities, pools, and things like that, are the like super major choice drivers for these audiences. So I think it's important to keep them in mind. And the same things apply. So I guess let's go back to what we discussed earlier. Like families are going to have an expensive trip, and they just want to make that one trip because it's going to make a huge difference in their year. I'm not sure who has kids or extended families that live far away, but I guess that makes a huge difference in the full year. So with the same logic, apply the value adds strategy that I mentioned before. But also one more thing to keep in mind is that families don't like surprises. So knowing where people are going to sleep and having extra beds available, so in case they want to host their extended families, for example, just makes a vacation rental so appealing. So that's like one important takeaway. We are actually seeing an increase in demand, just going, a bit just contradicting slightly what we heard before from when we look at the global trends. Families are actually growing on our platform, which is very good news. So what I'm trying to say is just don't miss that demand. It's really key, and it has a very positive story. One other thing I also want to mention is that going back to my value adds example, is that we are actually seeing an increase in audiences that are pretty agnostic in the accommodation type that they're seeking. So a lot more are coming with a non-fixated mindset of I want a vacation rental or I want a hotel. I think that's the beauty of like OTAs such as booking.com, because you can easily gain traffic and demand that you wouldn't get otherwise, as long as you have all the settings that I mentioned before. And that's an amazing opportunity. This segment, this accommodation type agnostic segment is an amazing opportunity. And if you add these features that I mentioned before, you can also make extra revenue out of them. Couple more things. Maybe I'm going to reference the pet owners. I'm not sure if you have that in your environment. I certainly have a lot of friends who obtained a pet during COVID, and I think what's happening right now is that they are assessing whether it's more expensive to book a pet accommodation while they're there going on holiday, or bring the pet with them. And actually, we are seeing a higher intent to bring the pet with you. That's actually nice for the pet and the owner as well. It's more economical as far as we see. So I think in the US, where we also have more domestic travelers, the rate of wanting to bring the pet with the traveler is higher. So around 50+%. Close in Italy, and globally around 40%. So that shows us that the pet owners grew as a segment and number, and also their intent to bring their pet with them in travel has actually grown, which is an amazing opportunity. So I think just keeping in mind to include pet friendliness and include pet inclusive rates is just adding a great opportunity and a revenue stream, because they probably assume they're going to pay for pet fees. Just make sure that you don't surprise them later on, and you do that upfront, so they know what they're up for. So these are a few things, I guess, in a nutshell. Just this core demand for vacation rentals is kind of unmissable. So let's just make sure we are set up for them.
Thank you, Martina. Very, very, very handy there as well. James, I wonder, you've listened to Martina there as well, and talked about some really interesting trends and insights. We've touched probably only slightly on the US with that, and I know that you've also got some data as well. So what are you seeing particularly in the US traveler trends at the moment at Lodgify?
Yeah, so Lodgify has data to support the trend of American travelers searching for family-friendly accommodation this summer. So we've recently released a report, the top 15 summer vacation rental destinations in the US. And what we found was 47% of the top destinations offered activities for both adults and children that they can enjoy together. So, beach and water activities, access to nature and outdoors, amusement parks, zoos, all of those sort of things were included in, nearly half of the top destinations. And these destinations include the likes of Ocean City in Maryland, Four Corners in Florida, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and others. So yeah, the family friendly destinations are definitely becoming more popular.
And sort of it's sort of catering still to that outdoor and nature enthusiast market that really, I think, brought up during lockdowns and COVID as well. Is this something that you probably see continuing as well, and maybe what some of the factors behind that?
Yeah, definitely in the same report, we've also released that 60% of the top 15 destinations offer a wide variety of outdoor and nature-based excursions, like hiking, biking, lake and rivers, and wildlife sightseeing. So yeah, we're definitely seeing a growing audience in that area for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, James. And again, we'll try and get that into our post-webinar follow-up content as well. So yes, we'll make sure that everyone can view that. And the same with Martina, with your annual predictions, annual trends that you're seeing. And we've got time probably. I wanted to go back to one question before we finished that we got from the audience. I think it was for Katie actually. And we were talking, it was specifically about lead times, Katie. So if lead times are shorter, is that an indication that larger groups, which tend to book further out, are also declining in number? And that question was from Mark Reitman.
I was actually just getting ready to reply to Mark. So the lead times that I mentioned were just on transient bookings. So groups would be totally separate as far as that lead time.
Fantastic. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much, Katie. And yes, I'll be following up with all of our speakers after this as well, making sure that we get those links and all of the data coming through to everyone who signed up today. I want to say a big thank you to all of our fantastic speakers today, to Sally, to James, to Martina, and to Katie. We've got just a couple of slides to very quickly run through before we finish up for today. On to the next slide. So we will be back in terms of short-term rentals on Tuesday, the 9th of July, for our next short-term rentals webinar, all about digital transformation and driving the end-to-end guest experience through AI. AI, another of the big buzzwords that we're seeing. We've probably only just touched on it today. And digital transformation, something we're very excited about too. So you really don't want to miss it, as we're lining up some more top caliber speakers. The sign up link is in the chat now, and you can also see the next webinar for our sister website as well, Boutique Hotel News, all about leveraging new distribution channels. We've got a few of those on today's session as well. For opportunities to work with us, on the next slide, please do contact my colleague Jordan using his details on screen. It's a great time to be working with us, whether it's on events, on podcasts, on webinars like this as well. All lots of great content there. We're going to keep this session open just for another few minutes if you want to jot down any of the details from the chat, and there has been quite a lot. If you need to jot down our speakers' contact details for today. And so a big thank you to Key Data and to Logify for sponsoring this webinar and our series in full. Thank you again to our speakers, and of course to everyone tuning in today, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hello, we are International Hospitality Media, or IHM for short. IHM is the #1 brand to engage with decision makers in hospitality and real estate. Our 4 multimedia brands lead their respective sectors with breaking news, comments, trends, and opinion across a variety of multimedia solutions. We provide an inspirational community to connect people through world-class events, webinars, podcasts, award schemes, and much more. But let us share our story of who we are and what we do. Over 10 years ago, Piers & George had a light bulb moment to provide expert opinion, comments, and low-cost digital content. And so they went on a journey over the past decade, creating media platforms to serve the hospitality and real estate industries. We now have an engaged audience with a reach of over 60,000 monthly visitors across our website, 48,000 of our email database across all the sectors, and over 67,000 across our social channels. Everything we do believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We make things simple and very easy to work with us. And we're a friendly bunch too. We offer creative solutions to help you achieve your business goals. Read, watch, listen, meet with IHM. Contact us for a chat today. Just look at some of the brands we have worked with recently.